Thank you, Ivanhoe. Good evening. When Miles called me and asked me to be a part of this program, I said I was actually not a formal participant in the civil rights movement, but I am a formal recipient of the legacy of that movement and its immediate developments, and I will say more about that. Miles also asked me to be the last speaker. He said, James, because I've heard you speak before, and so I'd like for you to wrap up, and I asked him if that was with a W, R, and R. So there will be some wrapping up and perhaps some wrapping. It is really an important opportunity, I think, for people of our age group to be engaged with people of your age group. And therein there is a reciprocal learning process. And I think it's important for you to consider that, because so many of us are socialized to look at lessons and to try to extract from the past, but not really to think about our own agency, our own imaginations, our own courage at the moment in which we're living. I would also ask you to consider the fact that on the planet tonight there are 7 billion people. And so there are a lot of lessons to be learned, and there are a lot of things going on that we simply do not understand. And so learning lessons is not so much the data as it is, I think, trying to understand what are the ethical issues of your time and to try to see if they are transcendent issues. So that the issues of the civil rights movement predate what we call the modern civil rights movement. It goes back to the founding of this country, in which African Americans were chattel, 3/5 of a man. We did not talk about women, certainly not black women, did not talk about white women, landowners. And so that the African American experience in the founding of the American Republic, in my view, is very much tied up with the ethos of this nation, the deep values of this nation, which run beyond the issues of statistics or any one given moment. African Americans, as a matter of history, not necessarily as a matter of racial pride, have really been the test case of all of the ideals of this republic, which are shining ideals, but the actual practice goes in the opposite direction. And that opposite direction is measured more significantly with respect to the dehumanization of African Americans that in my lifetime I also had the experience to see. So as a little personal narrative quickly, I grew up in my early years in a small town, we like to say off the hard road. Like many African Americans, like many poor white Americans, or Latinos whom we do not speak about, because the country was so characterized in black and white terms. There have always been multicultural groups in this country, starting with native peoples, different languages, different cultures, different social arrangements, different worldviews, different mysteries about the universe. But the issue of black and white is so inculcated in this country and still fundamentally inculcated, such that notwithstanding the changed demographics, where Latinos, and look around this room, and are there any Latinos in this room? I didn't hear any of the stereotypical last names. That's a very important question for your generation to consider, particularly in a city like New York City, where they are going to change the face of this nation. So one of the lessons I think to be extracted from the stories that you hear is try to pay attention, try to figure out what are the narratives of your moment. That's a lesson that I think people from the civil rights movement or from the labor movement, in hindsight, can give you. I'm not sure that any of us who were involved in movements, and I've been involved in other movements, in the immediacy of those movements extracted that this is going to be a long-term narrative, not just my immediate experience. Pay attention to the Latino question. So many people did not pay attention to the black question. So many people did not pay attention to the black women question in the black movement question. And now we see that narrative unfolding and taking on new life. I grew up in small towns where my grandmother was called Lizzie. Oh, you're Lizzie's boy. Worked for Miss Schumann. Miss Schumann was probably Jewish. My mother, who talks about working for Miss Schumann, who had a great humanity, but as far as we knew, we didn't know what a Jew was. Miss Schumann was white, but Miss Schumann knew that she was Jewish, and she knew that she was closer related to us vis-a-vis Eurocentric dominance than we might have thought. I was fortunate to be sent back to the country every year until I was about 17, because my little 4'11" mother, raising two rambunctious boys with a college degree, finished college in 3.5 years, first in her family, every opportunity she got for a break, she sent us back to the country. I did not realize the narrative that was being built, but that narrative that was being built was from the bottom up. This is where the ordinary people, including ordinary white people, many of whom did extraordinary things, and the way that they used their imaginations in agriculture. You know, every man, black man that I knew could hang a door, but none of them had finished 5th or 6th grade. You know, they could measure stuff. This was learning. I didn't know how to index that at the moment. But as I moved to the capital city and began to get some reflection of a more cosmopolitan area, then I was able to draw this contrast. I went to Atlanta, Georgia. In 1963 or 64, I would have been 16 or 17 years old. I finished high school in 1965. There was this new invention called the intercom, which in hindsight sounds like tin cans with wire tied to it. And we had to go up at this black university called the Negro University, Florida A&M University, agricultural and mechanical, and do a thought for the day, a prayer, information in this black high school affiliated with the university. And I was given the Pledge of Allegiance of the flag. And we were clowning, but out of my mouth at the end of the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag came liberty and justice for some people. I wished I had contrived it. I don't know where it came from. But in hindsight, where it came from was what was going on of the moment. The civil rights demonstrations going on in Tallahassee, Florida. I did not grow up in the church. I was in the insular side of the lower elements, the lower class elements of the black university. But something was in the air, and this is a lesson, I think. Try to figure out what's in the air. It's always not so obvious. Occupy was not so obvious to even a number of us progressives and leftists who thought this is anarchistic, you know, what are they doing down on Wall Street, what is this going to, it has changed, as someone was saying to me earlier, the young lady here, it's changed the discourse, it's changed the narrative, but is also manifesting now to have a big effect on talking about issues of class in the society. So being conscious of what is going on. When I went to Atlanta, Georgia, to Morehouse College, where Martin Luther King had gone a year, when did King go? 48? Would it have been 48? Probably 48. A year. I was born in 47. Atlanta, Georgia was, I'd never seen anything so big and sparkling and bright. But I met people from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. How many know the name Bernice Johnson Reagan? How many know the name Sweet Honey in the Rock? When I saw her walk across campus, woolly hair, long skirt, taut as she would stride, and people would say, see that woman there? We were sitting on the corner drinking wine. She's been to jail. Well, I knew who she was, not by name. I knew who she was by color, by style. I knew her as a metaphor from these rural communities that I had been in. And so it gave me a sense of identification because I had no idea what SNCC was. I was of that age group, but I was insulated from it. She's my neighbor today. We raised our children together, very, very close. The Black Power movement came in, but I had heard Rap Brown. I tried to debate him. He was a bigger rapper than I at Spelman College. But it was the spirit of the moment that captured me that I had no categories for, no language for, no index for. Think about your feelings in the moment in which you're living and what you're doing. I've been going to Cuba for 38 years. My first introduction to Cuba was in the SNCC house in Atlanta, Georgia, where I found a magazine, Pensamiento Crítico, Critical Thought. That was my first step into internationalism. I thought this was just a black American connection. But I found a lot of magazines and posters from Cuba, and the SNCC house was then abandoned. And Julian Bond's driver, J.P. Morgan, who had kicked in a door of an Army recruiting center in Atlanta, Georgia, and then went in exile, and I don't think he's ever come back. He went to Sweden or Norway or someplace. But think about the international connection. So much of our dialogue is driven about the nation and what black people did inside the United States. But Martin Luther King and others were very aware of what was going on in Africa, in Ghana, 57, what was going on in the Caribbean. So we have a tendency to focus on in where we are, but we are connected to the rest of the world. And I learned that through coming around SNCC. I was thrown out of Morehouse because we took over the administration building. This was the spirit of the moment, building on the civil rights movement, in part which we rejected, but which had impelled us. These are the contradictions at an early age you can't always figure out. We thought we were so much more radical and dramatic in the civil rights movement and did not understand that this was a crucible moment, a test case moment, a transition moment in American history, not just for black people, but for all people. People like me did not understand that when the first white person that I became aware of who died in the civil rights movement, that was the building of a multiracial front. Today we throw around these terms quite liberally, multiculturalism, interculturalism, but it was black and white together when you think about that moment. I did not understand that that movement was opening up America. I only thought it was opening up what was going on in the black community. So one of the things that I extract as I've gone along to think about is what are our connections to all communities in society, particularly the Latino community, which is going to change the fundamental nature of the society in your lifetime because they are transnational citizens who know their aunts, their uncles, their grandparents, their language, who go home and come home. This is not postmodernism. This is everyday life going on in the United States. I was kicked out of Morehouse College because we took over the administration building and we wanted to call the Atlanta University Center, Spelman, Clark, Atlanta University, Morehouse, the International Theological Center. We wanted to call it the Martin Luther King Center. We had these very idealistic perspectives. Locked up Daddy King, Martin Luther King's father. But then Vincent Harding, a name that I ask you to go and check out, one for the music, because he was one of the first to write about the popular music, song in our community and in our movement, very much like song in South Africa, was a way for people to articulate their narratives, their visions. These were deep narratives. They were also balms, B-A-L-M-S, to console people in the face of adversity. The role of culture is something to think about very, very deeply. Vincent Harding, a black Mennonite, an oddity, studied here at Columbia University, came south because he met Martin Luther King. He said, come join us. In a time when black and white people snuck across town to think about a new vision of life because you could easily be killed or assaulted, Vincent Harding spotted me. You never know who's watching you. And you should watch everybody, not in a surveillance kind of mode, but you don't know what's going to evolve. I had no idea what he saw in me when he asked me to come to the Martin Luther King Documentation Project, which later became the Martin Luther King Center. And a year later, he said, I want you to apply for a Southern Education Foundation Fellowship and come to the Institute of the Black World. A deal that he had made with Coretta King that if he would help found the Martin Luther King Center, he would also be given the latitude to found something called the Institute of the Black World, which connected us to people all across the world, where I met black communists like Harry Haywood, who had brought the Negro National question back from the 1928 Comintern. Be careful about how you categorize people. You never know what common humanity you're going to find if you only try to figure out whether their ideology fits your ideology. Vincent said to me a year later, I want you and Bernice Regan to apply for Ford Foundation fellowships. So these are legacies of the civil rights movement being passed to me in the very moment of that movement and its formal ebb that I was unaware of, and sent me off to graduate school. And so the last point I guess I would make here on talking about Vincent Harding, the Institute of the Black World, and all of the scholars that I met around there, they were like many of you. I asked the earlier question, do you just do reports and figure out how many media hits you get? And the young man here says, no. We then take those reports and we apply them to the formulation of legislation, and we take them. So applied scholarship, looking for people who are applying scholarship, is one of the legacies that I got out of that movement. Let me just stop on this point. I, in my youth, very idealistic, like many young people, thinking that if you just come up with the right logical construct, you can change the world. It's the power of logic, without understanding the messiness of history and the messiness of the negotiation of power, which is about politics. So I went off into something called the New Communist Movement, because it had textbook analysis, clear. If you just follow the, draw the line between the dots, you will show up. But it was only years later that I looked back on the Civil Rights Movement and this crucible moment, this transformative moment in American history. It was not just any one movement. It was the movement that gave vision to the African National Congress. Prior to the quote-unquote modern Civil Rights Movement, where did the African National Congress go? They went to Tuskegee, Alabama. They talked to Booker T. Washington. They watched the Civil Rights Movement. They learned much from us. And so the final point here is that we live in one of the most extraordinary countries in the history of humankind. We know all of the ills, all of the craziness, all of the potential fascism, in my view, that's going on. But people around the world are looking, this issue I raised earlier with some of you about transformative democracy. It was out of places like the Civil Rights Movement that we actually saw transformative democracy from the bottom up. The great majority of black people were not involved in the Civil Rights Movement. And the great majority of the people in the Civil Rights Movement were not the educated and the theological group who were put on television. It was the Fannie Lou Hamers who had come off of these plantations who, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. That's an encyclopedia. That's not just a catchy phrase. That is common sense, common speak. So pay attention to the common sense, common speech as you do your serious reports and whatnot. These are things that I inherited in the moment from the Civil Rights Movement. And I will close with my title, and that is Director of Cultural Heritage Policy at the Center for Folklife. And the only reason it's not a correction, Folklife, community, this was your point. Working with people to speak for themselves, not to speak for them. The demos. Demos meaning? Demos meaning? People. The ordinary people. Quassia meaning? The power of the ordinary person. The power of the ordinary person to put forth her imagination, her critiques, her praise, his projects, and not to romanticize it that they are just like you, because they're not just like you. You travel all over the world, you have panoramic views, you have comparative perspectives, but in collaboration with them, then there is the possibility of a new kind of democracy rather than a representative democracy. Thank you.